So I wanted to share first very brief thought about Sukkot, and then a thought about Simchat Torah, which is coming up. Zman Simchatenu, this is the mitzvah of being happy on Sukkot. And here's one lesson I've come to derive from that. What God is saying to us is that we can decide about our emotions. We can decide whether or not we want to be happy. That is an extraordinary statement. We are in control. A lot of people believe that happiness is related to their experiences in life. But I suspect that you know many people who have had relatively difficult lives and yet are happy. And there are some people that undoubtedly you know, I certainly know them, who've had pretty good lives and are unhappy. It's a choice to be happy or to be unhappy. God is saying to us, you have a choice to be happy on Sukkot and be happy, because it's a mitzvah to be happy. It's a great lesson to learn in all of our lives, and a great lesson for our children to learn, that if they're unhappy, part of it is because they've chosen to be unhappy. There are moments of unhappiness in everybody's life. There are moments to be unhappy. But if we realize that it's our choice, it's very liberating. It's a great lesson for us. It's a great lesson from our children. And it's a lesson that actually can be derived specifically from this holiday, the holiday of Sukkot. Now to a completely different perspective, a different idea on something else. We are going to celebrate Simchat Torah, the rejoicing of the Torah, literally the word Simchat Torah, so rejoice in the Torah. We're going to celebrate it here Sunday morning. And we're going to do it literally. We are literally going to dance with the Torah. By the way, we'll read the Torah that day. There is only one time throughout the year where we actually remove the Torahs from the ark and not read it. Anybody happen to know what it is? The only time during the year we remove the Torahs from the ark and don't read it? Kol Nidre. Kol Nidre is the only time during the year you take the Torahs from the ark and don't read it. So if you're on Jeopardy and that question comes up, you'll know the Messiah has come first. It will be the Messianic age. We're going to take the Torahs out of the ark and we're going to read it. And we're going to be reading the concluding words of the Torah. That's part of what we're going to be reading. Let me just set up the scene for you just quickly to give you a sense of where we are. It's been 40 years that the Israelites have been wandering through the desert, right? God's been leading them with Moses ably at his side, right? 18 times the Torah says that Moses is God's servant. They're at the edge of the promised land. There's been a lot of wandering. Moses knows he's not going to make it to the promised land. God told him back in Numbers chapter 20, as I recall, for hitting the rock. That's a whole other discussion. But God is going to take Moses to the top of the promised land, to the top of the edge of a mountain so that he can see the promised land. And I want to read to you just 6 verses so you know what we're going to be reading in the Torah, and then make a comment about it. Moses went up from the steppes of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the summit of Pisgah, opposite Jericho. By the way, when you go to Jericho, now you know this is real stuff. These are real places, right? And the Lord showed him the whole land, Gilead as far as Dan, Naphtali, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, the whole land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negev, the plain, the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. And the Lord said to him, this is the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will assign it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you shall not cross there. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the command of the Lord. He buried him in the valley of the land of Moab, near Beth Peor, and no one knows his burial place to this day. And I have to tell you, every time I read those verses, I want to cry. there's just something sad. Moses has been with us since chapter 2 of Exodus, all the way through Exodus, Leviticus, through Numbers and Deuteronomy. And I always feel sad. We could spend a lifetime studying about Moses. Undoubtedly, there are people who have. But I want to share with you just 3 lessons that I think we can learn from the life, indeed also the death of Moses, that we can take with us wherever we go. There are hundreds of lessons, obviously, but since we like to limit our sermons to 3 hours, I decided, don't worry. I'm just going to share with you 3 lessons that I think we can take with us. One's from the early part of his life, one's a little later, and one's from his death. In the early part of Moses' life, it's chapter 2 of Exodus, 3 things happen in Moses' life which show us his willingness to use almost any means necessary to get justice. That's the lesson. Moses was willing to use whatever means were necessary. And here's how we learn it. Moses wanders out. He sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. And he realizes the only way to stop this horrible situation is to kill the Egyptian. And that's what he does. He kills the Egyptian. Later, he sees 2 Hebrews fighting. And he says to them, Lama taketa re'echa, why do you hit your fellow? And in that case, his modus operandi is to speak. In the 3rd instance, Moses sees Midianite daughters going by a well, and shepherds come and they're to drive them off. And in that case, it says, Vayakam Moshe, and Moses rose to the defense of the Midianites. In the 1st instance, he killed. In the 2nd instance, he spoke. And in the 3rd instance, Moses simply stood. He did whatever he needed to do in order to confront and create justice. And that's one lesson for us. When it comes to defending the innocent, if there is no other choice, use physical force. When there's a time to stop 2 people who are talking, who are fighting, but you can use it with words, you can stop it with words, stop it with words. And sometimes all you have to do is stand. The key is to know when to do it, but know that all 3 are appropriate depending on the circumstance. That's lesson number 1. The second lesson that I learned from Moses, that we can all learn, is Moses' willingness to fight on God's behalf. You all may remember the incident of the golden calf, right? Moses is up on the mountain at Mount Sinai receiving the 10 Commandments. He's just a little bit late. What do the Israelites do? They take the gold that they had taken from the Egyptians, that they had brought with them through the desert, and they create a golden calf. And what do they do with this golden calf? They worship it. This generation of Israelites had been given so many signs of God's existence and so many signs of God's willingness to intervene. They had seen the Red Sea split. They had seen the 10 plagues before that. They had seen heard revelation at Mount Sinai. And the impression on them, in less than 2 months, they're worshiping a golden calf. Woody Allen had a great line. You can't quote Woody Allen anymore, but Woody Allen had a great line. He said, if only God would give me a clear sign of his existence, like making a large deposit in my name in a Swiss bank account. Right? They had every sign of God. And yet, the minute things went a little awry, the minute there was a little doubt, they worship a golden calf. So God tells Moses what's going on while Moses is still on the mountain. And then God tells Moses, and these are the words in the Torah, I see, he's speaking about the Israelites, this is a stiff-necked people, now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them, and I will destroy them and make of you a great nation. In other words, God's going to wipe them out and start all over again. with Moses. And you know Moses' response? Don't do that. First of all, he says to God, they're your people. He reminds God, they're your people. And you know what? If you don't do that, the Egyptians, what are the Egyptians going to say about you? With, excuse me, with evil intent, you freed all the Israelites only to annihilate them? That's really bad PR, God. Don't do it. And you know what? He doesn't. God doesn't do it. Moses' loyalty to God, to fight for God, is a lesson for all of us. Moses even went further. Moses reminded God that he had sworn to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob that he would promise them the land. So you're breaking an oath, Moses says, in a sense, to God, if you wipe out the Israelites. The lesson for us, we're the chosen people. We're God's emissaries. There's two groups who accept that. Those who love the Jews and those who hate the Jews. Everybody accepts that the Jews were the chosen people, chosen to bring God into this world. We have to fight for God at times too. We have to make sure that God looks good as well. We have to make sure that when we speak and by the way we act, that we're reflecting positively on God. That's part of our job. That we learn from Moses. And finally, the third lesson is from his death. And you know what? This is a lesson I've just come to realize recently. Moses doesn't make it to the promised land. He doesn't get in. This deeply devoted servant of God doesn't get in. This man who stood up for God to the people, this man who did everything right virtually, doesn't get into the promised land. He doesn't achieve his goal. He gets so close, but he doesn't achieve his goal. That tells me that we shouldn't get frustrated when we don't make it to the promised land. Every single one of us has a promised land. Not just literally, but figuratively. We have things that we want in our life. We have goals. We have achievement. As I said to somebody recently, no one dies with their inbox empty. There's always something more. And yet, it says in the Torah, in the two verses following the ones that I just read, that Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were undimmed and his vigor unabated. In other words, even though he didn't make it, he had as much passion and as much push and as much desire as he did at the beginning. He never gave up. And that's a lesson for us. We're not going to make it to the promised land. We may get into certain parts of it. We may achieve certain goals. But when you achieve those goals, you set new ones. That's fantastic. That's exactly how we should live. Who wants to rest on their laurels? Who doesn't want to grow? Who doesn't want the opportunity to think of new ideas and new things? And you know what? So you don't make it. Moses didn't make it. The greatest prophet of all time for every Jew doesn't make it. The key for us is to keep our eyes clear and our vigor pushing ahead. And so here's the great news. We don't conclude Simchat Torah's Torah reading with the end of the Torah. No, we start again at that moment with Genesis, with the beginning of the Torah, to remind us that God created the world. And you know what happens? A few months after that, Moses comes back. And we get to do it all over again. And for that alone, we have reasons to rejoice in the Torah. Shabbat Shalom.